Welcome back, everybody, to another Second Swing Live at Lunch here on the Second Swing YouTube channel. My name's Coss. I'm filling in for Drew today, and with us is Tyler Fitzel, Master Club Fitter at our Minnetonka location. Kind of a cool segment today. We are going to compare Mizuno Irons, new and old. It's kind of a battle of 2011 to 2025. We're going to start in the player's cavity with the MP59s versus the 2025 MP S-3s. Tyler, maybe just dive in a little bit, history of Mizuno Irons, what they're all about, what they're known for, and why players gravitate towards them.
Well, there's a couple things. First, you talk about Mizuno, and nothing feels like a Mizuno. It's their slogan, it's their tagline. They talk about the forging process. So one of the things that kind of sets Mizuno apart from many of the other manufacturers, or really where it started, was the manufacturing process. We know that all of these clubs are made in Japan, and they're all in the same foundry. That only one other thing happens. That foundry does car parts for Mazda and Mizuno golf clubs. That's it, that's all. And one of the things that kind of leads them to is they have maybe a better overview of the types of materials they're using and the process and the methods that the engineers get to work with. So they have been really one of the iconic player's blade style type irons for decades. And we think of some of the notables. Most recently, we think of a guy like Keith Mitchell, who's playing that.
Cashmere Keith.
Yep. And then
should have worn my visor today, Tyler.
And then if you want to think, as we kind of go back a little bit, Luke Donald was a huge Mizuno guy.
Former world #1.
Yeah, and they don't play. They don't pay a lot of players at that level. They do sponsor some, a lot of players for certain things, but they don't have a lot of complete top to bottom staff bag type players.
Right.
So we don't see a ton of Mizuno like on a weekend by weekend on the PGA Tour. You will see them a lot in like the DP World Tour, or the European Tour.
Right.
Thinking back from that, let's go back. One of the most iconic and golfers, I'm guessing he's Hall of Fame. Major winner Nick Faldo.
Yeah.
Was a Mizuno guy, top to bottom, was from basically, as far as I know, the beginning. And really, a lot of the iconic irons that we saw back then were still kind of, they shape what we see today in the future too.
And it's exciting for me too. Like I've always played Mizuno Irons. I've had Mizuno Irons in my bag for, I don't know, the last 10, 15 years. And today we get to kind of compare a couple of those with the 59, which have been in my bag for a while, and the new S3. So I'm curious to see how that plays out and what we're seeing on the TrackMan. Don't forget to all our followers and watchers today, drop your comments. Let's see what you think of the evolution. Are you a Mizuno guy? Have you played Mizuno Irons? What do you think of look, sound, and feel? But let's hit some shots, Tyler. Let's kind of jump right into it.
Yeah.
This is the MP59, and one thing that's noted is the lofts haven't changed here in that player's cavity iron, which is significant as we move into some of the other clubs we're reviewing today. The JPX 925, JPX 800, the lofts start to change a little bit, and we'll talk about that when we get into it. But this is the Mizuno MP59. Obviously, the first thing I notice is it's kind of nostalgic. It's been a while since they've been in my bag, but they're absolutely great looking. That little titanium insert on the back really adds to that. Nothing feels like a Mizuno kind of process. So, yeah, let's see how we go here and see what happens.
Cue it up. So one of the things that we're looking for, as we've been doing drivers for with Drew the last, I don't know how many weeks now, well, including actually, no, we had Michael was in your place for one of them as well. We've been talking a little bit about some of the numbers. I talk about this all the time. We've got ball speed, launch, spin, and direction. Okay, those 4 things happen. When we're talking about those 4 things with irons, some of the numbers that we're looking at are also what's its peak height, what's its landing angle, what's its stopping power. That is a conversation. It can be with any club, but more specifically as we get into something like the iron, we want to know, okay, this is going to carry, is this going to stop? Is this going to, there's differences this way where we talk a little bit about some of the models
And maybe what's
the,
also happened on a couple of mishits, you know? I
Yeah.
wouldn't say I got those particularly well. Shot shape I'm familiar with, but not one that I necessarily hit off the screws, I wouldn't say. That was better.
really solid. You just tell the ball speed was up a little bit.
Yeah.
Better too.
I don't know how Drew does it. It took me a moment there, you know, live at lunch here.
He's got no fear.
None
fear.
whatsoever.
No.
I mean, I think the first thing that I noticed, even compared to the S3s, is it has a little bit maybe higher toe than the S3s. The S3s feel almost a little bit longer on the blade length,
Yeah.
and this maybe has a slightly more offset. But I think it kind of fits an eye and has that traditional Mizuno feel for sure.
So one of the things that we talk about is the copper underlay. Mizuno started this a long time ago. One of the reasons it's got its feel happens to be because of the copper underlay. So one of the things that they went away from kind of in the mid-2000 teens was that copper underlay, and they brought it back. And they brought it back a couple models ago when they rebranded to the number series, I think it was the 221s.
241s, yeah.
Yeah, 221s and the 22s, now the 24s. So there's also some advancement in engineering and technology with a couple of the irons, like the one that you have in your hand where you have that titanium pocket.
Yes.
Right? They're trying to make a blade a little bit more forgiving. Well, how do you do that? So if you can take the weight and put it a bit more perimeter weighted, you can gain a little bit more control in terms of off-center hits, but also maybe even thin that area out to gain a little bit more ball speed with a thinner face. So they're trying to do that. Well, one of the things that they started was then this series of ideas of that titanium pocket as it was changing.
Yes.
Well, that titanium pocket, and this is kind of revolutionary, they actually put that pocket in during the forging process. So that titanium piece is actually, it's not something that they just necessarily glue on, especially as you look back to the, was it the split cavity 18s, the SC18s.
Correct.
Well, they had just one specific pocket, and it was the same piece. And in the forging process, as it's cooling, they put that in, and it cools around it, so it kind of locks that into place.
And the predecessor here, the 58s, as you're
Yes.
talking about that titanium piece kind of shrinking,
Yep.
that titanium piece in the 58 was a lot bigger, kind of stretched across the whole back.
Yep.
And that 59, it's a little bit more of a refined shape, but it has that same feel, and quite frankly, something that feels pretty good. Well, let me hit maybe one more here, get a piece of one.
Yeah, a couple more.
We'll take a look how it compares to the S3. Well, that one's a little toey.
But what, hit a couple, yeah, hit one
Yeah.
more. So one of the things that that also goes along with it in terms of when we talk about that pocket. So they started, what Mizuno did is kind of went back to the drawing board on that pocket and individualized every single iron. So that not only was the pocket different, but the titanium piece that went into it was very individual for the 7 iron, the 8 iron, the 9 iron. They wanted to make sure that what they had was as much individuality of the iron to make it perform at its peak, right? Like, so do I really need the same pocket to allow for the stable and the forgiveness on a pitching wedge, which may be a bit more of a scoring club, than I do like on my 5 iron? So that was one of the advancements in technology that they kind of started with, especially in this lineup. One of the other things I have to mention is that if we go back in time, every single company, and I mean every company, has had a blade, and as in just a pure blade. You kind of get into the market really based on what you see happening on the PGA Tour. But once you're in that market, you then still have to provide those clubs, and you still want to be on the PGA or the elite level, the professional tours. But you still also then have to make clubs for every type of golfer, if you will.
Correct.
So that's one of the things that we're looking at right here is kind of just a straight up blade. It does have that titanium pocket. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about as we get into the S3.
Right.
All right, one more.
Well, yeah, it's one more. Let's not end on that one there. Wasn't the one that we were looking for.
We're putting you under the pressure.
No, that's good though. Got to get warmed up a little bit.
So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we're looking at is just kind of as a general rule of thumb. Club speed's about 95. So if let's talk about fitting for a quick second.
Sure.
You come in, and one of the things that we're going to be looking at is trying to match up the length and strength as I talk about in the golf club. This is a lot more about irons and wedges than it is, say, for instance, a driver. But length is a part of this. From the strength position, you're moving the club very fast. It's not that you're fast with the club, that's just how you're moving it.
Right.
You need as much stability as we can possibly get. So for you, something probably heavy and extra stiff is the way to go. Now, Mizuno has what's called a DNA swing analyzer, and it is a shaft that has kind of an onboard computer with sensors, and what it does is it's measuring that motion. But there's a couple of key areas for this. One is the transition. So when we start to pull on a club, in the handle itself is where the transition or the weighting and that force gets directed out. So it's really the bending of the shaft that starts first in our transition. That's one of the things that we look at, and then from there, trying to determine the types of shafts that might work well. If we get a little bit lighter and still maintain extra stiff, for the stiffness you gain control, but the light might kick it higher. Vice versa, if you're talking about getting a lot heavier, that might bring the ball flight down. Now, in terms of an average for you, the launch is really good.
Yeah.
I would say that you had 2 shots in here that were coming off maybe a little bit lower without spin.
Yeah, got a little fin.
And those are, even for that, if we just take off maybe a couple of outliers, because that was the first swing that you made, at 18 degrees is a really nice launch. You have a lot of spin with that club, because I don't know how, we'll find out, because you've got your S3 with.
Yeah, this is the S3 I have here, and again, I think one thing I noticed is just the head shape kind of completely different. I think that the toe's not as high. It looks, at least for my eye, a little less offset.
Yeah.
And again, just kind of that refined shape. You don't have the titanium insert. You had the copper underlay. Is something that you were discussing in kind of the progression of the Mizuno irons. So it's curious to see hitting them back to back, feel, and ultimately what's happening with some of the results out there.
Yeah, cool.
So, and don't forget, folks, drop your comments, your likes, subscribe, do all those things. See what you think of our testing today between old and new Mizuno mid-player cavity irons. This is the Mizuno S-3. Let's give this a couple of hits and see how she goes. Pulled that.
Yeah, now remember, this is your club.
Yeah, right?
And maybe you do need to go back to the S59.
Well, they're still in the garage.
Yeah.
So, Tyler, if we need to, this might be the deciding moment here. We all can't just swing it on plane like Drew all the time. You know,
it's true.
We need some real golfers in here.
And not only that, but you and I did work on your iron set to begin with.
Right.
We took the time to just kind of look through some options. So I was going to mention shaft as you're hitting this. What do you have in there now?
This is the Modus 120X.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So I'd come from the KBS-C taper in the in the MP59s.
Okay.
And so I felt like this one just had a little bit more feel at the bottom, and I could kind of release it a little bit more. But
yeah. So if we talk shaft for a quick second, for someone at your speed, the feedback, what I would say is look and feel are non-measurables for me. They are for you.
Right.
Do you like the look? Do you like the feel? But what I'm looking at is I'm saying, with that type of club speed, we're going to have extra stiff for the stability. Now, in terms of whether or not we want to look at launch conditions, you hit the ball really solid. You get great numbers here. You're maybe hitting this even just a little higher. It's just a couple shots.
Sure.
I look at basically an extremely high percent. I mean like in the 80s for sure, if not 90% of all the PGA Tour players, they're playing a Dynamic Gold X100, most likely tour issued, which means they hand select them. That's the only difference. You can go get a Dynamic Gold X100. It's the same shaft but to tighter tolerances. If you wanted the tour issued, it's an upcharge most of the time. one of the things that I look for is that stability. So when over 50 years you've got one shaft that hasn't really changed, it's the same shaft, and they're still using it, and it's the highest percentage, there's a reason for it.
Right.
You get to a certain point where you're not going to get better, you're just going to get different.
Correct.
And the same thing would be true here if I put you in a Modus 130X, I put you in a KBS Tour X, if I put you in a C-Taper X. For you, this 120 is maybe just a little bit lighter. Maybe that's where you feel.
Yes, I think that's what it is.
Because the other ones don't feel like that.
Correct.
In a general sense, if I gave you a C-Taper 130X, you'd go, I can't feel the club.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know, just how I've kind of homemade swing here, I like that. Just maybe a little handsy at the bottom, whatever. I just kind of like that responsiveness right at impact.
Yep.
So, all right, let's see if we can get a couple more out there and take a look at the final comparison between these two.
So I remember talking, shout out Bill Price, he's the fitting director down at Mizuno down in just outside Atlanta. They have the new foundry. But many years ago, he would come in, and this is what we do as a company is we bring in the engineers, we bring in the experts, we sit down and we talk with them, whether it's us having them, into our stores with our fitters, or it's the fitters going to their places. But I remember him talking a little bit about this the last time he was in town, that essentially when we start talking about the fitting process, there's a long list of shafts that kind of pop up, and it's really all, and I want to say it's all, but it's very highly weight based. So there's kind of three properties that happen with the shaft, and especially when we're talking about irons, this becomes a really, really hot topic, right? It is absolutely a hot topic if we're talking about drivers and woods, but in an iron, you're going to get usually you're going to get turf interaction, you're going to have to account for lie angle changes, where if you think about like a driver, generally speaking, hopefully you're on a nice flat tee box. You got it teed up, or you have it, off the ground slightly. Like those are discounting the variables, and you get into irons, and now all of a sudden, not only is it just the shaft, it's the grip, it's the length, it's the lie angle, it's the loft. Like there's so many more variables that we kind of try to look at.
And speaking of some of that education too, is I know in the S3 they manipulated a little bit of that leading edge. They did a study around angle of attack. People are getting a little steeper, and so they tried to relieve some of that by taking off that leading edge. And that's something I noticed in the turf interaction between the MP59s and the S3s for sure.
Yeah.
Is a big difference. So,
but to finish that real quick, he told me that they had the previous generation, the 221s, and they were putting that copper back underneath, and they had two unmarked heads. They brought them out to the range and just asked, any general PGA professional, hey, would you hit this? And it's like, just hit a couple, and he hits a couple. So would you choose between one or the other? And I want to say he had like some 40 different professionals at a tour event hit the new copper, the copper underlay. Yeah. And every one of them said they would hit that club over the other one.
Okay.
So from
the
feedback perspective, yeah, that look is great, but I mean the feel, it's the feedback. It's like that's what we're looking for.
Right.
And that's super important.
And I wonder too, I mean, the 59 versus the S3, the 59 feels softer just on that contact. They both feel stable, but the softness is noticeable on the 59 versus the S3. And not that, one's maybe good or bad, but it does have a softer feel with the 59s. All right, one more here, and let's take a look.
Good.
That was a good strike there.
I'd almost even just go back to the very first, because it was just the very first.
Yeah, no, I tugged it.
Yep. And if we want to kind of compare to that, there's some more consistency here.
Yes.
Right? So you've got virtually the same identical club speed. There's maybe pretty much the same ball speed, But with your S3, there's just maybe a titch. It's about a half a degree higher launch. But still, even like the plus minus or the dispersion or the difference between it is not that great. You know, 165 RPMs between any of those shots, like that is exactly every single shot doing the same thing every single time.
Right.
And that's what we want. It's not like the S59 was a bad choice. Like you did that for a bunch of shots as well. Mm-hmm. But this is a good fit. Do you tend to have a pull with, like, what's your?
Yeah, if I'm going to miss, it's a pull. Ideally, I'd like that thing to just fall a little right, you
Yeah.
know, and fade a little back. But I mean, I'll take that as far as just I know what it's doing and I
Yeah.
can repeat it over
Yeah.
and over. So.
And the other thing about the S59 is you look kind of from its shaping and styling is the Mizuno Pro lineup is pretty much, they're not going to try to go and make gigantic changes. This is familiar with a couple of different companies out there. If you were to go see, kind of if you look at it from this perspective, if a Vokey wedge is not going to go too far off of what a Vokey wedge looks like. And the reason is, you don't need to mess around with the #1 selling and #1 played. And the same thing is true of Mizuno irons. Is if you have a blade-like looking iron, there are some subtleties. They are shifting weight. They're maybe talking about a different material. They're maybe doing something different with the grooves. Like there are differences. But when you start going back, I'll see players come in with sets that are 10 years old and say, yeah, it's time to, you know, get a new set. And when they set down a Mizuno, they go, well, it looks just like my old one.
No
it's
doubt.
It's exactly kind of the same thing.
100%.
So I just look at it as, you know, don't mess with a good thing.
Right. And how much, you know, how much really, you know, can we do in this category particular, right? That
Yeah.
kind of mid-players cavity. There's not a lot of discretionary weight to move around in general. They
Yeah.
get creative with materials, but at the end of the day, the player that's playing this is going to want that sort of consistency across the years. Any final thoughts there between the S3 and the MP59?
You know, the hard part with Mizuno is it's essentially a blade. You know, we can call cavity back all we want, but it's a very slim, very slight. And until we get into some of the more, call it game improvement types, you get modern. A lot of it is look and feel. And because their slogan says nothing feels like a Mizuno, it's true.
Right.
Like if I have a customer and we're fitting for irons, and let's say if we're kind of in that category with all the top manufacturers, I'll put the same shaft in every one, and they'll say it's like this one feels different.
Correct.
And good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter, whatever it is you like. So, yeah, I've gone away from it. I've gone to the 243 because I really like a blade. And so talk about perspective. They have the pitch, also in the gap, but I don't have the gap wedge. But the pitch, the 9, the 8, are solid forgings with a very little cavity in the back. Then you get into the 7654, and they have a pocket, and that pocket allows them to have a thin face for a little bit more ball speed. Still has a copper underlay. It's still a forging. It just really fits the best of both worlds for me.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, I've probably, all in all, I've probably played about 5 different sets of Mizunos.
Sure.
Yeah.
And any ones that your favorite that stick out, or is the 241 or 4
You know,
3s or
this was, it was during COVID, and pre-COVID, was it just the year before leading up to, I had gotten a set of the split cavity 18s, I believe they were. And those, I've just never hit anything better, but they were returned because we needed inventory. And I just moved on, right? But man, yeah.
There's always a set that got away, right? You know,
Yeah.
we always look back at what's been in our bags in
Yeah.
previous years, like, you know what, in retrospect, maybe those could have stayed for a while. So, outstanding. Well, let's move in here to the game improvement category.
Yeah.
The JPX 800, again, this is 2011 circa, kind of the MP59s, and we're going to compare that to the JPX 925. Again, you can really see, I think, with these game improvement clubs, the advancement in looks And while the technology is, trying to do similar things, they've really done a great job trying to refine the look, the style, just to kind of give it that clean golf club look that consumers are looking for. So initial thoughts, JPX 800 versus the 925.
The first thing that I look at with the JPX lineup is that it was essentially a slightly larger and deeper cavity version of kind of the blades, the very slight cavity back style. So if you're taking like the S59 and looking at that versus the MP59 versus the JPX 800, it's kind of more of a bigger, bulkier version. Yes. Well, what we see is most specifically in the hot metal is there were two versions of this, and there have been two versions kind of all along. There was the hot metal, which was not necessarily a softer forging. It didn't have maybe the copper underlay, but it was definitely a softer club overall. The other part of that is they've always had a forged head. And then there's the 800.
Correct.
There's like today, there's a 925 JPX forged and a 925 JPX hot metal.
Yeah.
There's different models of it.
I think that's part of the JPX line, right?
Yes.
They just have so many club categories that are fitting different golfers' needs. So, I mean, most golfers that come to visit you are going to fit in a JPX somewhere down the line.
You know, we talk about, we also talk about affordability, and the JPX lineup has always been kind of the affordable club compared to the pure. The forging process takes more time, it takes more effort, there is a more, there's clubs, not to say that these are less because they cost less. They can get a deeper cavity, they can make a thinner face. They're using, I know chromoly or hit materials, and that is putting chromium along with to kind of harden so they can make a face shaping. And that solid shaping is what still produces a lot of. One of the things we don't get to see in like the hot metal, as an example, on the outside, is the acoustic ribs that they have on the inside. They don't want it to sound clunky. They don't want it to sound hollow. So they're literally trying to keep that traditional sound. The 800 back in the day was really, really soft. It was quiet. It wasn't like loud.
Sure.
And that I think is another piece of the sound comes to the feel.
Yeah, I mean, sound and feel are related, you know,
Yep.
and how we're experiencing the strike and the playability of the iron. So we got the JPX 800 here. Let's take a few swings and give it a comparison to that 925.
I was just trying to think. I think I know copper was one we talked about with the underlay.
Yeah.
Beryllium is another one. We've seen that like with ping. We've also seen nickel. Those elements can add to a different feel by kind of taming the sound a little bit.
Sure.
It's the same idea if you were to put, noise canceling headphones on or earmuffs and just go straight up without any noise and hit shots, the feel would go away. So pretty much, you might not like the way that it felt from a feedback position, like swing weight in the kick or the swing weight. But if I had the exact same club, one's forged, one's not, and you put them without any noise, they'll feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, noticeable in terms of looks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
game improvement versus a player's cavity, for sure you're going to have that.
How does this feel?
It still feels soft. It definitely feels firmer.
Yeah.
I would say than the true forged MP59s, S3s. But overall, it's a pretty good looking club, and I think for folks that are looking for a little bit easier loft, for sure some forgiveness on mishits.
Yeah.
This is an unbelievable option for them. And I think I'm excited to move into the 925s here after a few shots to just really see how it's refined, because they're really just trying to do the same thing, and
Yep.
we'll see kind of over the years how they've refined that. But yeah, it's definitely coming off a little faster, a little easier to hit for sure. That'll be a good test there. That one was a little thin, but again, pretty forgiving.
And your numbers, just as a quick glance, the numbers are pretty consistent there again too. You could see that the height's 113 average. That was 114. I mean, we're talking about plus or minus 8 feet in the air.
Correct.
We're talking about launching at 18. Yeah.
And one thing we should note too is, as game improvements has evolved across manufacturers, is the loft structure, right?
Yeah.
I believe this one's 32 degrees aloft, I think, is a habit noted here. So
Okay.
that's a change coming from the MPs and the S3s.
Yeah.
That's 2 degrees stronger than kind of that standard 34 degrees.
And even today, now this
Right.
is something that we'll talk about as we get into the 925 hot metal, JPX hot metal, that it's 28 degrees.
Correct.
So when you start talking about 28 degrees, and before we started today, I was mentioning, is like, you're essentially holding a 5-iron compared to your set. You're holding a 5-iron that says
Right.
7 on the bottom when you start talking about some of the models. And this is one of the things that we do as we get towards the top of the bag, if we need to do something different with a longer iron, not just keep the 4-iron in the bag, but maybe go to a different model of a 4-iron to gain that ball speed. So not only can we gain that ball speed, but we can gain that launch and that spin. And those are some of the things that we look for in the fitting side of it.
I'm curious to see how, as we move to the 925 with less loft, what's happening to land angle, what's happening to spin, what's happening to launch.
Yeah.
How does that impact playing, stopping it on greens, club selection? I think those things matter if you're trying to play good golf. All right, let's get into one here, huh? What the heck?
Yeah, I also think that as a comparison, it's interesting because this is, we say, kind of circa 2011. That's performing basically like your current club.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to see that.
I think the advancements in the game improvement section are so much better than they were a long time ago. And it wasn't because, from a materials perspective, the engineers are really, at Mizuno, are really dialing in on the material, like what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how are we going to make this look this way, how are we going to make it sound this way, feel that way, perform a certain way. So I really like what you did with that, because it actually is just like almost a mirror image of what you've got in your hand.
So maybe it's just
playing.
whatever club I have is just kind of performing the same here.
Yeah, and so at least from that perspective, your club speed's the same. The ball speed's maybe up just a touch. You had 1,000 RPMs less than the MP59, but it was the same peak height, the same landing angle, basically the same carry distance in these other two, but with that, I think that less spin, that just keeps it in the air moving a little bit longer.
Correct.
Because it's not, and there's also an added ball speed. Every 1 mile an hour is about 2.5 yards, or is it 2.7 some yards. So just in that sense alone, if we've got 2 miles an hour more ball speed, you're talking about another 4 to 5 yards, if not 6 to 8 yards, and that's exactly what it's doing.
How much does that loft, 2 degrees stronger,
Yeah.
play into the spin rate?
It's interesting because it's not necessarily the spin rate calculated by the loft alone, but it is a factor to that.
Sure.
If we kind of take this as a general, so obviously I can't be specific for every golfer on the market. For every about 2 degrees, we're going to knock off about a half in terms of launch. And like right there, you didn't necessarily launch it any different. You just had more ball speed. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the material and the way that you spin that ball is different. That might just be the equipment. And one of the things I was going to point out, and this is not something, I didn't think of this as we're doing these, so you can forgive me. All these other live at lunches where we're doing these through the years types, I don't know that we talk golf balls.
Sure.
And golf ball's a huge piece of this puzzle because obviously it's the thing that we're measuring, the launch, the spin,
Right.
the direction, ball speed. So when we start talking about the ball, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the golf ball was really, it was a lot different than it is today. And so that equipment performed differently back then, but also we had different equipment that it performed with. So that's one of the reasons I actually think this is kind of cool to go through the years and say, well, how's this doing with today? Just that golf ball, that single golf ball on today's market,
Right.
with all of these different clubs. And what it all boils down to is, hey, I need a set of clubs that's reliable, is I can trust them. They're going to give me certain consistencies out of what I'm doing, but I really don't want to look at spending a couple $1,000s on a set.
Right.
Well, that's where you go back into a couple models, like even like something like this. It's got a ton of life left. This is what we do. We see people come in all the time for this.
Right.
So,
Visit secondswing.com or one of our stores, and
Yeah.
we'll have that right option for you.
or go
across the
online.
years.
Yeah,
And Nick
for
in the
sure.
comments just loving his JPX irons, calling them nuclear. So I think some of that jump in ball speed might be what he's referring to there.
Yeah.
All right, so we got the JPX 925 here.
Yep.
This is the newest version of the JPX lineup from Mizuno. Again, this is where the lofts we really start to see change. I believe this is at 28 degrees of
Yeah.
loft. We started with the Mizuno at 34 degrees of loft. So we're 6 degrees of loft stronger here in a 7-iron. So hopefully we see maybe a little bit longer shots. Hopefully we can keep some of the spin and the launch conditions similar and see what happens. Oh, I pulled it again to start. Actually, that's kind of staying online. I didn't hit that great, but you can see right away.
Balls, yeah, I mean, you close the face down a little,
Yep.
but you still had a landing angle at 46. You still had a stopping power in about 9 yards.
And you can see that spin rate dramatically
Yeah.
kind of fall out of the sky.
If you're a golfer out there and you're saying, I need something that launches higher, loft is where you're going to get that, generally speaking. And it's not going to, and we hear this a lot, I just need a different shaft. A shaft can do certain things, but what a shaft cannot do is move itself. So the shaft is also something that plays into this. I know what you have in there. You have a Nippon, you got a Neo
Yes,
in that thing. Is it even a stiff?
it is a stiff.
Okay.
Correct.
So we're talking about basically maybe sub 100 gram versus what was the other JPX? It looks like a KBS.
This is, yeah,
So-
KBS. It's a tour.
Okay.
Tour
So-
stiff, yeah.
So that's 120 gram weight.
Sure.
That is a gigantic weight difference.
In terms of like shape and stuff, you can definitely see how they've started to refine the kind of the feel and the look. But
Yeah.
in terms of like top line offset, they look very, very similar. It's when you kind of get to the back and what they look like in your bag, where they've kind of cleaned up some of the badging and made sure
Yep.
that it's a little bit more internal. You don't see kind of that deep undercut cavity in the 925s like you did in the 800s.
Yeah.
But in terms of looks, absolutely playable and something that, I think a lot of golfers could feel confident looking at.
Yeah.
Let's hit a couple more and get some final thoughts on new versus old Mizuno.
And this is a really good example because that was almost the same sort of launch and spin as the 800
Yes.
when you were hitting it. Right there, good peak height, everything about that, but the ball speeds up.
Yes.
And so it's a very, very thin face. It's an incredibly thin face. Ball speed is a giant factor in terms of distance, but so is launch and spin. That's one of the reasons why even like we talk about the 920, the 925 lineup. So there's a forged, which is a true forging, and that is more of an elevated cost price. There's the 925 hot metal, that's the base model. There's the Hot Metal Pro, which is a slimmed down version, still 28 degrees. There's also a high launch version, and that's another one too, where they've got a version that adds loft to try to help increase a little bit of that launch and spin.
All right, let's hit a couple more and maybe get some final thoughts here for 925. There's definitely some consistency in our strike here. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's really good. Now look at the ball speed, 133.
Mm-hmm.
That's just that's a driver when I don't hit it solid.
Been there. Absolutely ball speed up. And again, I think that stronger loft's coming into play, but I think it's curious that, you know, there's still some stopping power and some launch conditions that are playable for sure.
Okay, so now grab the Pro, because
Let's do it.
what I want to, no, I meant the Hot Metal Pro.
Yes.
Because what I want to look at now is I want to look at the idea, I grabbed a plus ½ inch and I grabbed the Dynamic Gold X100. In other words, when I put this together, it was more for the idea of fitting for you.
Sure.
In terms of what you have. So the other one that we're using is very, very lightweight, very.
Right.
Let's see what happens when we put a little bit of weight and stiffness to the club speed you got. There you go.
Yeah, that one definitely felt like I'm used to. A little bit more stable. Feels very similar, obviously.
Yeah.
Maybe just a little softer, and the shape's definitely a little bit more refined with the Pro.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was looking for in this is the consistency. So you hit a couple more. I just want to see,
Sure.
is it the weight of the shaft and the flex that maybe this is a bit more consistent, which is what we look for.
I got on top of that one. That'll happen out there, though.
Good. Because if I'm looking at these, and let's just say for a moment we'll take away the one, so you've got these three. They're plus minus a yard in terms of carry distance, total distances. The launch angle is 0.3 apart. The ball speed's 0.4 apart. The spin is essentially at 6,300 on every single one. The launch, the landing angle, everything that I'm looking at with this club is very, very, very consistent. And that's one of the reasons why I said, you know, let's try this. I know we had it as the hot metal, but this is also what I look at in terms of a fitting. You can go hit any club you want, but if we dial in and you get to that type of a fit right there, that's more appropriate for what you do with the club. And this is why you guys need to get a fitting.
Absolutely.
This is why I don't care what your swing looks like. I don't care where your game is at. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about new equipment versus used equipment. If you're on a budget, great. And if you're not, everything is available in terms of our fittings. We want to be able to make sure that we dial it in. And like right there, that's a better fit. But as we look back through the years, you also, one of the other clubs that was probably the best club up there was the one you've already got.
Right.
and again, it is yours. It was fit that way. We wanted to do it for that reason.
Correct.
So what I would say is for you specifically, as we get into the longer clubs, what iron do you go to in your S3 model?
4.
Do you have a 3 iron?
No. 4.
Do you-
7 would.
Do you like, is a 3 iron not functional for you?
Not functional. No.
Okay. It's interesting because you have you have launch, you have club speed, ball speed, launch, and spin. And so I would say is like, maybe it's not an actual 3 iron as a part of the set, but it's
Sure.
maybe it's a 3 iron from a different model or something to become more like a driving iron with that.
Right.
But yeah, and that makes sense too, because a 7 wood with an extra stiff, what do you have? Like
2ADIZ, yeah, 8X.
a 7 or an 8X?
8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Done.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the moral of the story here. Obviously, some key differences between the years in terms of technology. For sure was kind of that refined shape, the sound and the feel. But at the end of the day, you know, if you're looking for a quality set of irons, throughout the years, Mizuno's absolutely something that we can look for. Check out our stores, our online, Get Fit by one of our master fitters just like Tyler. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Join us again, not next week, as we'll be on holiday for the 4th of July, but the following week. Drew will be back with Tyler. Enjoy your 4th, everybody. And Tyler, if you want to sign us off.
Absolutely, I'd love to. Keep your grooves clean, stay razor sharp.